A fame-hungry woman aiming to be a world-famous news anchor is prepared to destroy anything and anyone that stands in her way, utilizing her exquisite beauty and steely resolve. Local tabloids are raining news about Suzanne Stone, involving her in the demise of her husband. The articles contain detailed interviews with the parties involved, including the suspect, as a documentary commences. In an unknown studio, Suzanne, a weather reporter, faces the camera, introducing herself as Suzanne Moretto, then changing it to Suzanne Stone, her professional name. She sobs upon remembering her husband Larry Moretto lying lifeless on the ground. She immediately gains composure and introduces her husband's parents Joe and Angela and sister-in-law Janice. She emphasizes that having an ethnic relationship with the Morettos gives her valuable insights as a professional media member. On the ice rink, Janice is interviewed about her sister-in-law, and she bluntly says she's a cold person. Despite numerous beautiful ladies chasing after her brother Larry, he becomes enamored with Suzanne, leaving Janice clueless about the reasons behind his choice. The sister tried to convince her brother to look for someone else, but Larry was determined to have only Suzanne, as he found her delicate and warm opposite to Janice's impression. Soon after, her brother told her he would marry the stunning woman, emphasizing that the woman he loved was incredibly delicate and gentle. The three spent time together, and Suzanne subtly but impactfully commented on Janice's imperfect appearance. The sister ignored it while his lover's eloquence enchanted Larry. In the studio, Suzanne clarifies that using Stone doesn't have a hidden meaning because many successful women have used their maiden name rather than their married name. She points out that she has always known her path since childhood. In another interview where the Stones and Morettos participate, the host asks Earl, Suzanne's father, about his impression of Larry. He honestly answers that he discouraged his daughter because she obtained a high education in electronic journalism while Larry was a high school graduate. He adds that his daughter laughed at him, and he concluded that Larry channeled her other side. And Faye, Suzanne's sister, interjects, saying it's her wild side. Joe also explains his hesitancy about the relationship but has given his blessings upon learning that his son sold his drums to straighten himself. Soon the two were married, and Larry was so proud that his wife designed their luxurious wedding ring. Carol, Suzanne's mother, states their surprise upon learning that the newlywed went to Florida for their honeymoon since her daughter dislikes the beach. So she concludes that she did it for Larry, who loves boating and fishing. The Stones conclude that the honeymoon was successful since they came back radiant. Joe adds that his son took out his savings to buy a good house and bought a Mustang for Suzanne. On the ice rink, Janice emphasizes how terrible Suzanne's preferences are, especially on food when they get together. She recalled an evening when she excused herself early from the gathering, needing to rehearse for a TV show feature. Suzanne stared at her with jealousy, prompting Larry to interrupt and approach his wife with some good news. Angela shrieked excitedly, thinking they were pregnant, but the couple clarified they were not. Instead, Suzanne got a job at WWEN TV station. Satisfied that the attention was on her, she stared at Janice, who felt awkward. Meanwhile, Lydia, a student from the local school, is also interviewed. She shares information about the weather reporter's real aim in Florida, to mingle with famous TV personalities. At that time, Suzanne's beauty caught the attention of the event speaker, and they shared some drinks afterward. The man told her that if she truly desired to be in the spotlight, she had to be willing to go to great lengths. He gave an example of a famous female anchor who went to a TV station all dressed up with a recommendation letter. She was hired and became prominent. However, years later, the event speaker discovered the letter was fake. Due to Suzanne's limited understanding, she found it challenging to follow the story, requiring the man to explain every detail to her while she feigned laughter alongside them. Soon, the man made a suggestive gesture under the table, hinting at the lengths she might need to go to for success in the industry. Hours later, a drunk Suzanne returned to their hotel and initiated intimacy with Larry. Mr. Grant, WWEN TV's boss, is interviewed about Suzanne, and he mockingly calls her gangbusters with his assistant George. He accepted applicants with low educational backgrounds and experience to do mundane office tasks at that time. Still, Suzanne barged in with her headstrong speech, imitating the advice she received from the man in Florida. However, Mr. Grant didn't go with the flow and dismissed her, not giving her a chance to present her recommendation letter. She was hired in the end even though she had nothing much to do. She kept bugging Mr. Grant with her proposals, so after a few months, the boss allowed her to be a weather reporter. Her family, especially Larry, was incredibly proud of her despite her over-the-top movements and coquettish presentation. The media interviews are currently incarcerated student named Jimmy. He explains that his sole interest lies in the weather due to Suzanne and expresses his adoration for her. He recalled when Suzanne was invited to represent her TV station at his school. Mr. Finlayson, their teacher, introduced her to the class, and Russell, a troublesome student, immediately began teasing her inappropriately. Suzanne explained that her documentary was about how teenagers think about various things. She asked if anyone had experienced being on TV, and Lydia raised her hand despite being a passerby at that time. Mr. Finlayson returned and swiftly intervened, preventing Russell's inappropriate behavior towards Suzanne. After class, Jimmy, another troublesome student, and Lydia signed up for the documentary while Russell was threatened by his teacher to make up with Suzanne by contributing to her work. The reporter commenced her documentary while dealing with the teenager's unruly behavior, but her persistence remained firm. One day, the teenagers talked about their perception of Suzanne, and Russell expressed how someone too perfect might have a dark side. Lydia disagreed, seeing Suzanne as a nice person. During a Moretto gathering, Larry became a star with the kids, and Angela asked her daughter-in-law about having children. Suzanne immediately brushed the idea away since women in her career couldn't work properly with a bulging stomach. After the party, she went to the station for the late-night weather report. Due to her overly busy schedule, Larry began feeling dissatisfied and called Janice for advice. His sister told him he needed to set boundaries with Suzanne, so the husband waited for his wife for a heart-to-heart talk that night. He gently told his wife that they need to set their priorities as a couple, and being overly focused on her weather reporting, despite how good she was in this, won't bring her to mainstream media. Upon hearing this, Suzanne was slapped back to reality and kept quiet. In the studio, the reporter currently describes how her husband supports her but firmly proclaims that she doesn't accept failure, no matter what, and divorce was never mentioned. Returning to Lydia, she narrates the story of her past bond with the reporter. She even shared her secret of being inappropriately treated by a family member, which led to her threatening him with a gun under her mom's pillow. Lydia comments that she shouldn't have said that because it might have given Suzanne some ideas. In the past, Larry went out of town with his father, leaving his wife alone in the house, but he reminded Suzanne to think about what they discussed. Hours passed, and the reporter stood in the middle of their house until the doorbell rang, revealing Lydia and Jimmy. Suzanne urged them to dance while taking a video of them, but Lydia had 2 left feet, and despite her demonstration, the teenager gave up. Hence, the reporter danced closely with Jimmy, making Lydia feel uncomfortable. Suzanne asked her a favor to take Walter, her dog, for a walk. Moments later, Lydia returned and witnessed Jimmy and Suzanne doing inappropriate things in a room. Back to Jimmy's interview in the present time, he narrates how they became closer and how their love ignited. One day, Suzanne came to him, sobbing as she stated how she kept pushing Larry away during intimate times because she could only think of Jimmy. She implied she was being battered and told the teenager to run away together, but Jimmy suggested getting a divorce. She argued that she couldn't get a divorce because Larry would take everything from her, including Walter. So Jimmy consoled her by saying people like her husband shouldn't live. Suzanne received the response she liked and happily danced in the rain in front of Jimmy. During Lydia's interview, she explains how the reporter allowed her to drive to make the teenager an assistant once the reporter goes to mainstream TV. However, Lydia knew that the places Suzanne went to are for personal satisfaction with Jimmy. While the reporter pleasured the teenager, she asked if Russell agreed, and Jimmy told her that his friend was asking for compensation and some CDs. Then Suzanne inquired if he had taken the gun, but Jimmy answered that he thought the reporter should be the one to ask Lydia. Suzanne answered she couldn't, so she urged him to do his best, but the teenager remained hesitant. Therefore, Suzanne said Russell may have been a better choice, and Jimmy declared he'd do it next week. As a reward, she pleasured him again. A party for Suzanne and Larry's first wedding anniversary was celebrated in their abode, while Jimmy, Russell, and Lydia managed to get the gun. After assisting the guests, Larry returned home while Suzanne commenced her live broadcast at the TV station. Unbeknownst to the clueless husband, he failed to notice the presence of intruders Jimmy and Larry until he was suddenly attacked. As Suzanne's show broadcasted on the TV, Jimmy had Larry at gunpoint. The husband offered them his expensive possessions to save himself, and Russell took them. While Jimmy was hesitating, he recalled his intimate days with Suzanne, and seeing her face on the screen strengthened his resolve. Russell prompted his friend to end the job but noticed the wedding ring, so he demanded it. Larry refused, saying his wife would take his life if he lost it. After flashes of Suzanne's memories flooded Jimmy, he mentioned her name, and Larry discovered that the intruder knew his wife. The teenager mumbled an apology before pulling the trigger while the weather report ended, and Mr. Grant became in awe with Suzanne's presentation. The reporter wished her husband a happy anniversary on live TV. The current Suzanne, who is in the studio, stops talking as she recalls the tragic events. In the past, Angela shrieked in agony upon receiving a call about her son. Joe rushed to check on her, and police flooded the crime scene as they collected evidence, retrieving pieces of shells. Earl and Janice simultaneously received calls about the tragedy. The sister collapsed in agony while Joe answered the cops' questions. The disheveled Suzanne noticed media lights outside the house, and the cops told her she didn't need to entertain them. However, her eyes lit up while maintaining poker face as she approached the reporters. Meanwhile, in the present time, Jimmy explains how surprised he was when Larry didn't even fight back, because according to Suzanne's stories, he's a mean man. Jimmy recalled how he attended the funeral secretly, and Suzanne suddenly played All By Myself to sensationalize the event. On the other hand, Janice, who's being interviewed at present, declares that she knew the culprit was Suzanne upon hearing that at the funeral. In the past, Lydia knocked on the reporter's door to ask what they were supposed to do since she was scared and Jimmy was waiting across the street. Suzanne dragged her inside and clarified that they were cutting ties with each other. The teenager went out, and Jimmy found it unbelievable that the woman was throwing them away. Unbeknownst to them, a cop silently watched them from afar. The following day, Suzanne went to the TV station to retrieve the evidence from the documentary tapes, but Grant told her that the police already took them. At present, Mr. Grant shows the interviewer the footage that caught the police's attention. Suzanne asked the students about safe intimacy, and Jimmy answered that he was not concerned because his current partner was very clean. He winked at her and Russell giggled, knowing the truth. Soon the police went to Jimmy's home and found pictures of him and Suzanne. They proceeded to Lydia's house and recovered the gun while Russell was taken from work at the beach. In the studio, Suzanne expresses her disbelief at being taken advantage of after caring for the teenagers. She declares with teary eyes that justice will prevail in the end as she blames the youngsters. In the past, the police interrogated Jimmy, and though he denied the accusations, all evidence and traces of the incident were on them. He sobbed as he explained that Larry was hurting Suzanne and that she promised to make him a sports announcer. Then he professed that they love each other. His crying ended when the cops asked how often he became intimate with the reporter, and he happily told them countless times. Soon, the cops conspired with Lydia and attached a wiretap on her to set up Suzanne. The ladies met at a mall, and the teenager casually asked about the incident, but the reporter declared that there was no evidence pointing to her. She dragged Lydia to the women's room and scolded her, blaming everything on their foolishness and obsessiveness toward her. Lydia cried as she thought they were friends, but the heartless reporter told her that she needed to keep quiet since no one would believe a bunch of teenagers with a lousy record compared to someone like her. Soon, Suzanne was arrested, but she was released on bail. She enjoyed the media's attention and gave a pure statement about liberty. Then she confessed that Larry had problems with unauthorized substances, which pushed her to do the documentary with the teenagers. She added that Jimmy and Russell met with her husband without her knowing it, pushing Larry to take those substances. As the interview got shown on TV, Joe smashed it in anger. In a present interview with the Stones and Morettos, Earl relays that the last footage after Suzanne was released was the last time they saw her. Meanwhile, Suzanne happily tells the interviewer in the studio that offers are pouring in for her. However, as she wraps up the interview, it's revealed that she isn't in a studio but in her own home, recording the video alone. She takes the tape and heads out with Walter, driving through a snowy bridge to meet a man who presents himself as someone from Hollywood. He urges her to leave her car and escorts her to a secluded, dilapidated house. That evening, the unknown man calls Joe to report something, and the father thanks him. Angela and her husband stare at each other meaningfully. Soon, the winter wind blows some remnants of the snow on Suzanne's red Mustang, revealing her cold and lifeless body. On the other hand, Jimmy states that he'll stay incarcerated for 30 years years, while Russell for only 16. He misses his friends, including Lydia, but he longs for Suzanne the most, which is ironic as he can't even remember her face. Meanwhile, Lydia gives an ending statement about how Suzanne perceives the world. For the reporter, there's no use doing something worthwhile if nobody's watching. She adds that being on TV improves a person, so when everyone's on TV, people will be better. Lydia argues that if this is the case, no one can watch anymore. Then she proudly says that she's guesting at popular talk shows starting next week. Lydia points out how annoyed Suzanne would be if she knew she would be famous. Afterward, Janice gracefully skates with delight on the pond near the dilapidated house where Suzanne was taken.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.